But more importantly, we're on a mission. The mission is to create the digital credit market. So I think the company has two speeds. When the credit markets don't offer us anything compelling and the equity markets aren't compelling, we are coasting. And in my mind, I think that that is a $75 billion company growing 30% a year for the next 20 years. That is in idle. And so the risk-free rate, the company is going to get the 30% a year for 20 years if we take no risk. If we sell credit, we can take that 30% to 40% or to 50%. But we have an agenda here. The agenda is not to artfully manage the balance sheet. We don't want to be the revolutionary company that adopted digital capital that grew the company with conventional traditional credit. We want to be the revolutionary company that discovered digital capital, that then went on to discover and found the digital credit market. When you're just rolling a bunch of 5 to 7 year bonds, and when you're opportunistic, you're careening toward the future with an advantage. I want MSTR to stand for monster. We want to create a monster company. We don't want to careen toward the future with an advantage. We don't want to be the talented fighter, that kind of wins and loses and mostly wins and is a little bit sloppy and undisciplined. We want to create the digital credit instruments that are 2 to 4 times better than everything in the $300 trillion market, and we want to eat the world. And we want to sell $100 billion of them, and after we sell 10 billion, then 20 billion, then 40 billion, then 80 billion. So I would say you want to boil that down. It's a very disciplined growth strategy. We would rather coast and have a bulletproof balance sheet and a $75 billion company growing 30% a year. I don't want to be the dude that made a good trade that made 25 or made $50 billion by trading Bitcoin, by using cheap corporate money. We don't want to be the company that made 25 or $50 billion or a Hail Mary, or maybe we lost it by whatever, borrowing money, however we can get it to buy Bitcoin. We want to be the company that provided a comfortable retirement to 1 billion people and changed the world. There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. The frequency parameter and the block size parameter for a crypto asset network is the equivalent to the space-time constants. The 10-minute frequency, that's how fast the universe evolves. And the block size is the gravitational constant. How much mass, or what is the relationship between mass and energy, and how tightly packed is matter? Once you've established those two constants, you've defined the constants that run the universe. Everything else evolves around those two constants. This is why you would never want to change them. Changing them is playing God, and you only get to play God once. Bitcoin is a nuclear hardened protocol. It's pretty much the most robust, resilient thing the human race has yet to invent. For example, it's running on tens of thousands of nodes. You can't even identify the nodes, and there's an identical copy of the Bitcoin ledger on every one of them. So if all of the electricity got shut off everywhere on Earth, and every computer failed everywhere on Earth for 10 years, the protocol just goes dormant for 10 years. And as soon as one person turns one node back on, the entire protocol comes back to life again. You could literally wipe out 99% of all the nodes. You wouldn't notice. Real estate, in theory, is scarce desirable, but we can make more land. Half of Miami Beach is all just man-made. Half of Boston is man-made. Look at Emirates, a lot of man-made stuff. The entire airport in Hong Kong is made on reclaimed land. So even land itself isn't truly scarce. And of course, ultimately, there's plenty of real estate in the world. I mean, if you fly over the United States and you look down, you'll notice that 98% of the country is not occupied. Land doesn't make a good treasury asset. The ideal asset for a corporation or a wealthy person is an asset which is liquid and fungible. So I've got a certain amount of money, and on Saturday afternoon, if I need to raise cash, is there somebody somewhere in the world that will create a market for the thing that I have to sell? And there is a market for Bitcoin on Saturday afternoon worldwide. In fact, it's the greatest global market. There's not a market for your ranch in Texas on Saturday afternoon. What is the significance of Bitcoin? Well, let me say it a different way. Take everything you earn, you buy Bitcoin, and you wait, and it goes up 20 to 40% a year forever. Or you take your money and you invest it in a bank account and you get 3% after tax, and everything goes up 10 to 15% a year in price, and you just get poorer and poorer. Or what are you going to do? Buy GameStop? You buy a building, run an Airbnb. Forcing you to be a hedge fund manager is horrifically inefficient for the society. It's just as inefficient as saying, okay, be your own dentist and doctor, right? If the medical system was broken, you have to be your own doctor. It's not good for society. What happens? People die 20 years early is what happens. So when you have to be your own banker or be your own hedge fund manager, what happens is you just get poor. I'm going to be buying the top forever. I mean, here's what I tell you. When Bitcoin's $1 million a coin, I bet you I will probably buy $1 billion of it at $1 million a coin, probably in one day. And when it's 2 million, I will probably be doing it again in one day. And when it's 10 million, I will be doing $1 billion or more in one day. We're not stopping. The big idea here is there's $450 trillion of assets in equity, real estate, fixed income that store of value assets in the 20th century economy. There's $2 trillion in Bitcoin in the 21st century economy. We're the bridge. We're going to continue to create Bitcoin-backed securities to channel that capital from an inefficient energy form to a more efficient structure. Over a long enough timeline, every counterparty will fail, including you. Over 100 years, everybody you trust, every bank, every company, everything, every structure that works now will fail. You will need to adapt. A wise person is prepared to abandon their baggage at several times along the road of life. So be prepared, have a plan, work it now, be monitoring it every quarter or every year, and at some point, when that is no longer the right path, don't be ashamed to change the path. Have a succession plan, keep your affairs in order. I will go on the record, I think the biggest threat to Bitcoin is overfunded, enthusiastic developers that want to do something cool, that want to make it better. And I actually think if you look at the history of every empire and the fall of every empire, everyone, Rome, Greece, they always reach a peak and they collapse from within because a bunch of overfunded lawyers write laws to make things better. And I think in this particular case, the developers are the lawyers, and the code they're writing are the laws. I think it's inconsistent with the community to basically idealistically charge forward jamming upgrades because it might make things better in the future. I really think that's an Ethereum thing. I think if you look at the Ethereum roadmap, it's like, I never saw a good idea. I didn't want to get into the protocol, and I have 10 years of good ideas, and that's kind of like forcible mutation that leads to monstrosity. When you think about the wars of the 21st century and beyond, you're going to have to dominate cyberspace or protect your cyberspace. Something as simple as on Twitter, What if I just eliminated all of the bots on Twitter? You know, in my experience, 95% of the toxicity is generated by non-people, has traditionally been on Twitter. And when they eliminated the bots, 95% of the uncivil, toxic behavior that made everybody enraged just went away. Einstein tells us matter is energy and energy is matter. If you look at the advances of the human civilization, many people don't think in terms of energy, but if you thought about it, you'd realize that steel is highly concentrated metallic energy. And the reason that you can build a 100-story skyscraper is because you put so much energy into a material that it could withstand the force of gravity up to 100 stories. And so because you have steel, you can build a bridge, you can build a skyscraper, it'll last 100 years. So that concentrated energy allowed your aspirations to become expansive in time and space, right? That's why we have the Bronze Age giving way to the Steel Age. It's pretty clear that Bitcoin maximalists, they have a lot of the faith and the conviction of true believers in any religious faith for the past 2,000 years. And why wouldn't they? They share the same values. Their values are truth, natural laws, laws of physics, laws of thermodynamics, math, Austrian economics, no such thing as a free lunch, self-reliance, honesty, fairness, and technology and advance. They share those values. What is engineering? I mean, I'm an engineer. I think engineering is an incredibly honorable, ethical, life-affirming profession. That the basic credo of the engineer is, I look at nature and I look at the circumstances that I'm surrounded by, and I use my intellect and every material and technique at hand in order to construct a better world for everyone and everything that I love. This is the first one that's perfected, that's functioning. It's the first one to cross $100 billion in market cap, and now it's about $200 billion in market cap. $200 billion means $200 billion of monetary energy. And if I look at all of the other great digital networks, Apple, Google, Facebook, when they cross $100 billion of monetary energy, then that's a legitimizing step. Generally, when they get there, 95% or more of the investment community doesn't believe in them. Sometimes 99% doesn't believe in them, but they're too big to fail. They're fires that have been unleashed into the society, and they're burning. The effect is exothermal. My family's life savings for 200 years were obliterated in the first 6 weeks at MIT, listening to those classes in a lecture hall with 400 people. Or you could just keep your money and go online and you could listen to the same lectures. And he's talking about like Newtonian physics. It's 300-year-old stuff. I mean, Isaac Newton wrote Principia Mathematica hundreds of years ago. It's 99.9% of all the math you're ever going to need. Why is there a copyright on this stuff? Why is someone going to charge you $250,000 to learn calculus? It hasn't changed in 300 years. It should be free. The average life expectancy of a Roman is 72. You've got baths, you've got writing, you've got civilization, you've got sanitation, you've got aqueducts, you've got roads. They've got stuff pretty well organized and sophisticated machines. And then, of course, we take a hard left turn into the dark ages and stuff just starts to break down. It's a reminder that nothing is certain. If you miss a key insight, you could waste 1,000 years. You move from 3 years to 10 years, and then you move from 10 years to 100 years. And at the 100-year time frame, it's pretty clear what's an asset and what's a store of value. And that's where it's just very obvious. Bitcoin is a store of value if its believers have religious conviction in it. If you step out to 1,000-year time frame and you say, what's this thing gotta be in order to last 1,000 years? it better be the worship of math and the laws of thermodynamics and the laws of physics and Einstein and Newton. That might make it. So you see lots of examples in history where people try to do something and they either accidentally discover it, like penicillin, or a tinkerer discovers it and not the educated, and then all the professors crap all over it and they all swear it'll never work. And the tendency is either to reject it, people don't like change, or it doesn't get embraced until everybody dies or until there's a war. And war has a way of opening your mind, because when someone drops a bomb on your head and you're burning or screaming, then the pain causes you to take a more open-minded attitude. Years ago, the rich person had 2 horsepower or 4 horsepower, carriage. And we went to the point where a poor person has 400 horsepower. And I think AI is like that, where there's a lot of people that weren't able to generate perfect legal documents or prose or perfect business letters or a witty rap. And now anybody can. And in fact, the person that uses the AI will probably look more intelligent than the actual talented person that doesn't. There are a lot of securities on Wall Street where there's only 2 market makers. There's the one bank and the other bank, and they trade with each other. And if you're buying at the top of the spread and you're selling at the bottom of the spread, and the spread is 2%, if I turn over $1 billion worth of bonds, I'm paying $20 million in commissions. And there's a monopoly there. It's flowing into the building. And my buddy works for that bank and I work for this bank, and we drink together and we just kind of joke about the 200 basis point spread. Peter Thiel says courage is in much shorter supply than genius. And that's the most brilliant thing I've ever heard. Like there's 800,000 geniuses in the world, but how many original thinkers are there in the world that actually are willing to take a courageous stance? It's a lot less than 800,000. It's an encrypted energy crucible in which we store the precious energy of life, and we're insulating it via an encrypted vacuum layer from all the things that would bleed off or steal that heat, steal the heat, steal the energy, be it a political exchange or just physical, right? There are a lot of ways to lose the energy of life, and Bitcoin solves that problem. We created crypto rails in order to make it 50,000 times cheaper to move. But it's not just that it's 50,000 times cheaper. It's that it's 1,000 times faster and 50,000 times cheaper. And then when you start to multiply 1,000 times 50,000, and you realize it starts to be 50 million times faster. The phrase religious conviction pops into my head. And if we come back to the essence of religious conviction, there is a place called heaven, and there is joy, and there is no pain in heaven, and there's a place for you. And I've gone ahead to make a place for you. And that's such a powerful, powerful idea. That's the cornerstone of Christianity. It's the cornerstone of every religion, or most religions. I imagine all successful religions. We all want to go to heaven. You know, Satoshi started this chain reaction that in essence created a place called cyberspace. And there is a place called cyberspace, and it is forming. And in cyberspace, you have rights, you are recognized, you have freedom, you have sovereignty. There is a place for you. It's amazing to me how certain things can be just right in front of a civilization and they just won't grab them. Like if you go to St. Peter's Square, to the Vatican, and you look at that column, that was, and Trajan's column was put up, on the, to celebrate the triumph of Trajan and his wars. And in the ancient Roman times, that had Trajan's statue on it. And Trajan is standing there in his imperial robes, and he's holding his hand up in the air. And do you know what he's holding in his hand? He's holding the world, and it's round. He's holding the globe in his hand. And this is 100 AD. Fast forward 1400 years, and people think the world is flat. Focus your energy. You think you can do everything, you can't, and everybody overestimates all the things they can do. The things I regret in my life are all the good ideas I pursued to the detriment of my great idea. If you're going to dominate, how do you deliver force harder, faster, stronger, smarter? I could think of 100 examples in history. You tend to see those things. If it's got the characteristic that it can be made harder, it can be made smarter, it can be made stronger, it can be made faster, there's something compelling about it. That's why digital gold is thousands of times better than gold. Gold is a dumb rock. Gold is not going to move itself. Gold is not going to feel pain. It's not going to feel pity. It's not going to feel inspiration. It's just going to lie there and wait. And Bitcoin is a different thing. The anti-fragility of Bitcoin comes from the fact that everybody in the ecosystem feels the same pain in the same way. If Bitcoin's price goes down, every Bitcoin holder feels it. If Bitcoin is hacked and goes to zero, every Bitcoiner loses their life's energy. We are a hive creature, all integrated with one another. Like, how many companies failed competing against Amazon? How many companies failed competing against Microsoft? How many companies failed competing against Facebook? Right? How many companies failed competing against Apple? I can give you 20,000 really well-run companies, and they all were smashed by Apple, or smashed by Google, or smashed by Amazon. Like, anybody ever worked in retail? There's 20,000 good retail companies, all destroyed by Amazon and or Walmart. It was just hopeless. Like blood current, it's carrying the energy of life. Oxygen is energy, right? Your blood carries energy to keep you alive. Currency is carrying energy. If a sovereign nation is injecting massive inflations into its own currency, it's injecting a toxicity into its own circulatory system. And it's somewhere between either, one metaphor is chemotherapy, another metaphor would be diabetes, type 2 diabetes. I'm injecting so much sugar into your system that your insulin response is failing and you're becoming insulin resistant. Now, what about 6,500 other cryptocurrencies? Irrelevant. They're not $1 trillion. Okay, the S&P is $32 trillion, up 39% this year, up 11% on average every year for a decade. Well, what do I think about 5,000 publicly traded companies? Irrelevant. I mean, maybe I can have an opinion on the $1 trillion ones, Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, maybe. But, you want to pitch me 50 million ventures? Irrelevant. 50 million small companies? Irrelevant. 89 million small pieces of real estate? Irrelevant. And we talk about the fire of truth and the fire of faith, or the keeper of the flame. And the keeper of the flame really means something. If you have a city, a village, a civilization, a tribe, and you've got a fire and it goes out, you might very well die. You don't want that fire to go out. Figure out what's going to go up by a factor of 100 or 1,000 and just go stand there and wait for entropy to take its course and wait for gravity to take its effect. Let the water flow downhill and let the fire burn, right? And don't dash around while the fire is burning everything. Stand up and watch it. Arthur C. Clarke writes, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And it was a great quote. We have thousands and thousands of examples of magic things in our lives today that are just technical things. It's always been that way. And to a primitive man, right, a rifle looks magical, or an airplane. And now we're starting to deal with some software technologies and digital technologies that don't just look magical to a primitive man, they're going to look magical to a modern man. People have been studying and honoring math and algebra for 2,000 years. They've been honoring calculus for 400 years, right? You could say this is truly the adoption of economics as a science. It's that critical inflection point where economics went from being a political preference to being a science. And if you adopt it as a science, then you get massive advantages technically. And if you reject it, I guess it's kind of like the guys in the Dark Ages, and they could accept calculus or they could reject calculus. My first serious formative memory of MIT is I walk into a materials science class. The professor walks out, and he is a consultant for NASA, and he designed these tiles that went on the space shuttle. And he takes one of the tiles, and it's burnt. It's got streaks on it. He holds it up in front of the class. He says, on the space shuttle's last re-entry, this tile burned off the space shuttle. Nobody at NASA knows why, and we're not sure how to fix it. What do you think? And everybody looks at everybody, and there's a pregnant pause for 60 seconds. Wait a minute, the answer to this question is not in the back of the book. Someone raises their hand and says, well, maybe we should reverse the composite lattices or change the material. And it dawns on all of us that this professor, who's the smartest in the world at what he does, working for the leading space agency in the world, doesn't have an answer to a fundamental problem, has never been answered in the history of the human race. He's looking at a bunch of people. He expects you to think for yourself and figure it out. Humans have been struggling for millions of years, right? In order to rise, first to become the apex predator in nature. But if you look at our struggle against nature, there's never such thing as a fair fight. What makes human beings unique is, as far as I can see, they're the only animal that plays with fire. As Bitcoin gets harder, its price is going up. Well, the power in the network is directly proportional to the price because it's equal to 21 million times the price. That's the power in the network. You can almost think of it as a voltage or something too. The higher the voltage, the more energy passes through. If you read enough history, you just see tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of battles and wars just fought over property. Someone wants to take something from somebody else. After they finish taking it, then whoever the ruler is starts redistributing the property amongst their subjects, generally in a corrupt fashion. And someone's fighting to not be abused. And it's just a never-ending struggle of the more powerful dominating the less powerful. The adherents, the maximalists, were fanatic zealots about protecting the integrity of the network against meddlers who would screw it up. If the network is supported by those with a religious conviction to the network, such that you could imagine 100 years from now, there will still be people protecting the network. The phrase is keepers of the flame. I have a holding company. The holding company is called Alcantara. And Alcantara is based upon something I saw in Alcantara, Spain. It's a Roman bridge. It stood for 2,000 years. And if you go underneath that bridge, you'll find a Roman inscription in Latin where the Roman engineer, whose name is Julius Locker, said, quote, "This bridge will stand for all time," unquote. They took their engineering seriously. For example, in the world, if I give you 100,000 assets and I keep track of the volatility and the return of the asset every minute of the day, every hour, every day, every week, or every month, I generate a huge amount of information, all of which is irrelevant. And only a practical appreciation of statistics will remind you that 99.99% of all the information in front of you is irrelevant. It's not like 10 times better. It's not 100 times better. It's not 1,000,000 times better. It goes to infinity and it never stops. And that's the breakthrough that people don't get. It's like, what could I do if I had vacuum and I was rid of friction? And yeah, there's a price to pay. And that's your phase change and your state change. I would say Bitcoin is the most efficient system for channeling energy through time and space in the history of mankind.